Have you ever felt so invisible that the slightest attention could make you do the unthinkable? I wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble found me. And in the blink of an eye, I did something I knew would ruin everything. But in that moment, I didn't care. What happens when you stop caring? I was a mother, a wife, a woman who did everything right. Yet somewhere along the way, I became invisible. My days blurred together, defined by schedules, meals, and never-ending chores. My husband Mark was a good man, but he was lost in his work, leaving little room for me. And then there was Sarah, my best friend. She could see what I couldn't. You deserve to feel alive again, she'd say. And maybe I did. But when Alex walked into my life, something shifted. He saw me. Really saw me. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was worth something more than just a mother or a wife. Every day felt like I was living the same life on repeat. Wake up, make breakfast, shuffle the kids off to school, run errands, clean the house. I didn't mind doing it, but somewhere in all of that, I lost myself. My husband Mark would leave for work before the sun rose, and by the time he came home, the house was quiet, the kids asleep, and I was too tired to even look at him the way I once did. I was just going through the motions. No spark. No passion. And the worst part? He didn't even seem to notice. There were moments when I'd stand in the kitchen, chopping vegetables or doing laundry, and wonder if I'd ever feel more than just this. My body, my mind, they were still here, but my heart was somewhere else, longing for something I couldn't even name. But who had time for longing when you had to keep everything in place? No one had asked me how I was. No one even noticed. Sarah had been on me for weeks. You need a break, she'd say, just one day to feel alive again. You've earned it. You're not just a wife or a mom. You're still you, Sophie. You're still that woman who used to smile for no reason. I laughed it off at first, of course. I couldn't even remember the last time I did anything for myself. It felt selfish, like I was abandoning my responsibilities. But Sarah didn't give up. Come on, you'll feel better, I promise. And one afternoon, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, staring at a face that looked so tired. The same face I had been wearing for years. Maybe just one day, I thought. I deserved one day, didn't I? Just one day to break free from the routine. To not be a mom or wife. To be just Sophie, even if only for a little while. So I agreed. I put on a dress I hadn't worn in ages, one that actually made me feel something. A hint of who I used to be. The moment I stepped outside, something in me shifted. The air felt different. Lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't running errands or checking tasks off a list. I was free. And that feeling? It felt good. It felt like it was all I needed. Sarah's words echoed in my mind. Just one day. Maybe this would be enough to fix everything. We walked into the cafe, and I remember feeling out of place at first. It wasn't that I didn't belong. It was more like I had forgotten how to belong to myself. I stood there for a moment, not sure of what to do with all this space, all this freedom. But then, I saw him. Alex. He was sitting at the counter, his back slightly turned, but the moment I glanced in his direction, he turned to face me. It was just a second, but the way he looked at me was like a light had clicked on, bright and warm, something unfamiliar. A smile stretched across his face, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. It wasn't the type of smile I had received from my husband in years, not the polite "I'm here" smile or the rushed "good morning" smile. No, this was different. It was a smile that made me feel seen, appreciated. I felt the smallest flutter inside me, something I hadn't felt in so long. "Hi," he said, his voice smooth, welcoming. "I hope I'm not interrupting." His tone was light, playful even. But it wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them. He was genuinely interested. He wasn't rushing me, trying to get somewhere. He was present. I answered, and we started talking. And the more we spoke, the easier it became, as if we were two old friends catching up. I laughed, a little too loudly, but I didn't care. It felt good to laugh. It felt good to be me, just me, without the weight of everyone else's expectations. His attention was like a drug, and I could feel the dopamine rush as I realized I wasn't just a passing conversation. I was being noticed, appreciated, and that for some reason felt so foreign, so real. He leaned in slightly, making the conversation feel even more intimate. It's rare to meet someone who can carry a conversation like that, he said, his eyes locking with mine in a way that made my heart beat a little faster. There it was again. That spark. That feeling of being seen. I wanted more of it. And in that moment, I knew I would get more. As we continued talking, the conversation flowed effortlessly, almost too easily. I was talking to him like I had known him forever, like there was no weight, no judgment. I was just me in that moment. And then, out of nowhere, he said it. You know, he smiled, you've got this energy about you. It's rare. The words hung in the air, and I felt a sudden warmth rush to my cheeks. My heart beat a little faster, not from embarrassment, but from something else. Something exciting. I had always prided myself on being strong, independent. But this was different. Alex wasn't just commenting on my appearance, he wasn't just telling me I looked nice. He was seeing me. He was seeing the parts of myself I had buried under the weight of motherhood and responsibilities, the parts of me that had been forgotten. I think you're exactly the kind of person I'd want to be around, he added. The words felt like a breath of fresh air, like he wasn't just seeing the woman I had become, the one that cooked dinner and folded laundry, but the woman I used to be, the one who was full of dreams and laughter, the one who could light up a room. And that feeling of being seen, really seen, sparked something in me that I hadn't felt in a long time. My shoulders, which had been weighed down by the burden of my life, seemed to lighten. For a moment, I felt like I could breathe again. The thrill of his attention was electrifying. It wasn't just flattering, it was needed. I wanted more of it. I craved it. I found myself leaning in a little closer, my voice softer, more engaged. I was hanging onto every word he said. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he made me feel. In that moment, I was no longer just Sophie the wife, Sophie the mother. I was Sophie, the woman who could be admired. The woman who could be desired. And God, it felt good. The more we talked, the more I found myself drawn to him. His presence, his smile, the way he listened to every word I said. Every little gesture felt like it mattered, like I mattered. It wasn't just the compliments. It was the way he made me feel like I was something more than just a woman stuck in her routine. The excitement bubbled up inside me, a thrill that I hadn't felt in years. But then, almost immediately, it was replaced by guilt. My mind was a tug-of-war. What are you doing? A voice inside me screamed. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be feeling this way. I was married. I had kids. I had responsibilities. How could I even think about straying from that? And yet, when I looked at Alex, none of that mattered. It was as if the world outside of this moment didn't exist. The more he talked, the more I wanted to stay in this world. This world where I wasn't just a mom or a wife, but a woman who could be desired. Just for tonight, I told myself. Just one night. No one would ever have to know. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. I wasn't just enjoying a moment, I was escaping. And in the back of my mind, my husband's face flashed. Mark. I could almost hear his voice in my head, calling me, asking me to come back to the life we'd built. But the way Alex was looking at me, like I was everything, it felt too good. I felt seen again. I couldn't deny it any longer. I wanted more. The connection, the rush, the thrill of being wanted. But was it worth it? Was I willing to risk everything for this fleeting escape? My chest tightened with the weight of the choice I was facing. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to go home. But then Alex smiled again, and the pull was too strong. I stayed. The music shifted, a soft rhythm that seemed to echo in my chest. Alex glanced at me, his eyes catching mine in a way that made my breath hitch. Dance with me, he said, and for a moment, I hesitated. It felt like too much, like I might cross a line I couldn't come back from. But then, the excitement from earlier surged again. This time, it was different. It was bold. I nodded, letting him lead me onto the floor. As we moved together, it felt like everything around us disappeared. The crowd, the noise, the worries, they all melted away. It was just the two of us. His hand rested lightly on my back, guiding me, but there was an electricity in the way he touched me, as though every point of contact was charged. My heart pounded faster, not just from the movement, but from the closeness. The music wrapped around us, sensual and slow, and with every step we took, I could feel him drawing me in. The warmth of his hand on my back sent a shiver down my spine, and I couldn't help but lean in closer, feeling his breath just inches from my ear. The world outside faded. I was no longer the wife, no longer the mother, just a woman, his woman, in that moment. I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. The air was thick with tension, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was magnetic, a pull I didn't want to fight. My body moved naturally against his, responding to his rhythm, to the energy between us. With each step, the chemistry between us grew stronger, more undeniable. My head swam with a mix of excitement and something deeper, something warm and comforting. This wasn't just the thrill of being desired, it was something more. It was connection. I could feel the oxytocin in my veins, the sense of intimacy building as our bodies aligned, as we moved in sync. In his arms, I felt wanted, cherished, like I was the only person in the room. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't care about the life waiting for me back home. This moment, this feeling, was all that mattered. The heat of his body against mine, the quiet buzz of the music, the way we seemed to breathe together, it was intoxicating. I had forgotten what it felt like to be desired, to be seen in a way that made me feel like me, not just someone's partner or mother. This felt real. And it felt right, even though everything about it screamed that it was wrong. The music slowed, and for a brief moment, it felt like time itself had stopped. Alex's hand moved to my cheek, his thumb grazing my skin in a way that made every nerve in my body wake up. I looked into his eyes, and everything I had been holding back suddenly seemed pointless. It was like the weight of the world lifted, and all I could feel was him. His touch, his presence. He leaned in, his lips soft, warm, and when they finally met mine, it was like the entire room vanished. There was no music, no noise, just the feeling of his lips on mine. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't a mistake. It was slow, deliberate, and perfect. My heart raced, my thoughts scattered, and in that instant, all the guilt, all the hesitation disappeared. The kiss deepened, and with it, I felt every part of me unravel. The connection between us was electric, alive, intoxicating. His hands on me made my pulse spike, and I realized I wasn't just physically drawn to him, I needed this. I needed to feel this alive, to feel wanted, seen, cherished. In the back of my mind, I heard a distant voice telling me to stop, to pull away, but the heat in my chest, the fire in my veins, made me forget everything else. All I could feel was him, all I could think about was how good it felt to be desired like this. And in that moment, everything I thought I knew about myself, about my life, blurred away. I was no longer the woman who had to be strong for everyone. I was just me, a woman who could feel something real. Something I'd forgotten existed. When I woke up the next morning, the room was still, quiet. My body ached in a way I didn't expect. But it wasn't the kind of ache I usually felt from exhaustion, it was the ache of something deeper. I had crossed a line. The weight of it hit me all at once. The kiss. The connection. The feeling of being seen, wanted. I could still feel his touch on my skin, taste his kiss on my lips. And as much as the guilt tried to crawl in, as much as the realization of what I'd done tore at me, I couldn't ignore the truth. The truth that I had felt alive. I had felt alive. But now, in the quiet aftermath, everything felt so distant. Like a dream I was slowly waking from, but part of me didn't want to wake up. What did that make me? Was I still the woman I had been before this? Or was I someone else now? Someone who could never undo what had just happened? The drive home was unbearable. Every street, every familiar landmark, felt like a reminder of the life I had left behind for just one night. Mark was at home, probably preparing breakfast for the kids, completely unaware of what had happened. And as I walked through the door, the silence in the house screamed at me. It was too quiet. It was too real. The weight of the normality of it all crashed over me. How could I go back to being the wife, the mother, after this? How could I pretend that everything was the same when I knew, deep down, nothing would ever be the same again? Every time I glanced at Mark, I felt the distance between us. I felt it in my bones. How could I look at him the same way after what I had done? How could I go back to the life I had before when I now knew what it felt like to be wanted? To feel wanted. I could feel the secret sitting on my chest, heavier than anything I'd ever carried before. I knew what I had to do, but I wasn't sure I was ready to face it. Do I tell Mark the truth? Do I risk everything for something I wasn't sure I even wanted in the long run? Or do I bury this and pretend it never happened, live with the guilt but at least keep my family intact? The choice felt impossible. But in the quiet of the night, I knew one thing for sure. No matter what I decided, I would never be the same person I was before. The woman who had walked out of that cafe was not the same woman who was walking back into her house. And that truth was the hardest thing I'd ever have to live with. I was a wife, a mother, but I was also a woman who needed to feel seen again. I forgot who I was, even if just for a moment. But sometimes, the price of a smile is the cost of everything else. And I wasn't sure I could ever pay it back. But what about you? Have you ever made a choice that changed everything? What would you do if the consequences were too high? Think about it. And if you've been where I've been, share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your story. And if you found this story powerful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment of what's next.